The 80s, a wild era for action movies, was not so kind to their sequels. Think of classics like Highlander and Predator, all tainted by less than stellar follow-ups. However, the sequels in movies do not necessarily mean that their comic book sequels would be equally bad. Now, RoboCop gets a similar treatment in Dynamite. This series, penned by Rob Williams and illustrated by Fabiano Neves for the initial 4 issues, and then Unai Di Zarate, with colorists changing throughout, takes us back to 1987. It's a fresh start, disregarding the movie sequels and exploring a new path after the original film. Set in a timeline that picks up after the events of the first RoboCop film, the series kickstarts with a story arc titled Revolution for the first 4 issues, and then takes a slightly different turn in the last 2. So without further ado, let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Detroit is lawless again. The story, like all RoboCop stories, begins with a news report, which of course paints a picture of a tumultuous world. At the news desks, anchors Casey Wong and Jess Perkins epitomize the rapid, high-stakes environment of media, ready to serve the world's happenings in digestible digital bites. One segment cuts to a grim economic forecast highlighting the deteriorating public sentiment about the same. There's talk of an economic downturn and pressure on the president amidst failures of big corporations. It's a snapshot of a nation grappling with financial instability. On the war front, we see troops bolstered by cutting-edge technology, and despite the grim nature of conflict, there's a glimmer of hope among the soldiers, thanks to the arrival of advanced weapons produced by Omni Consumer Products, or OCP. The battlefield report is a blend of propaganda and hope, with the usual censorship in play. The corporate angle isn't forgot due to OCP's success with the military contracts. The stock market reacts and share prices fluctuate, which might just save OCP from a hostile takeover looming over the horizon. The next few panels takes us through the ferociousness of old Detroit streets, gripped in a high-octane action sequence. The comic really begins to feel like a RoboCop story, complete with a near-future dystopia where law enforcement clashes with heavy artillery against the overarching gloom of urban decay. Anyway, officers from the Detroit Police Department tear through the streets. They confront heavily armed thugs, challenging the might of the police force. The firepower on display is immense, with bullets flying, ricocheting off the armored plating, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. In the middle of a full-blown crisis, Detroit's finest are hustling to gain the upper hand, but they're banking on RoboCop to be their ace in the hole. Murphy's doing its thing, of being the half-man, half-machine cop, but before Murphy could do much, the vehicle, which had hostages inside, goes up in flames. But it was not the cops or the bad guys, it was OCP's Ed 209 droids that rained fire on the vehicle, killing 2 cops and hostages. After the smoke clears, the scene shifts to the precinct. No one's happy about the killer robots running up and down the streets. What's worse is that they do not stop to ask questions or use judgment. Their only intention is to destroy criminals, no matter the collateral damage. Now that can't be healthy, can it? But hold up, there's more bad news. Let me ask you a question. Assuming that there was an option, would you let your streets be patrolled by armed droids? Anyway, back in the precinct, tension cuts through the air as Edwina Odenkirk, an executive from Omni Consumer Products, steps in with an announcement that shakes the earth for the cops. The cops, including RoboCop, stand by as she reveals that due to cost-cutting measures, the officers are being let go effective immediately and without any pension or severance pay. OCP, having privatized the Detroit Police Department, is enforcing corporate efficiency over traditional policing. Odenkirk doesn't mince words, pointing out the rampant crime on the streets as evidence of the officers' underperformance. But that's not entirely true, and we know it. But it's not termination for RoboCop. To add insult to injury, Odenkirk introduces the newer version of the enforcement droids, the Ed 209Bs. As the new face of law enforcement, these droids are glitch-free, work around the clock, and don't demand pay or perks. The Ed 209Bs warn the cops against action if they do not put down their weapons. While his human colleagues are dismissed, Odenkirk singles out Murphy for a private discussion, hinting at a different fate for the cyborg officer. Loretta Pulse, a reporter, is covering the story live. Odenkirk's talking a big game about cleaning up the city with these new Ed 209B enforcement droids. They even gave a live demo taking down a burglar on the run, non-lethal style, but still pretty hardcore. Not everyone's on board with this though. Sergeant Reed, who's just been laid off after decades on the force, is pointing fingers at the system, saying it's not just the cops who are failing, it's the whole social support network that's broken. Meanwhile, Mason Manslaughter Vogler, a former former wrestler turned city councilman is making waves. He sent out a video rant about the state of society. Jobs are scarce, food shops are closing, and he's preaching that if the system won't help, people might start taking what they need by force. And he's not being subtle about it, calling for some divine retribution kind of action. Later, efforts are being made to update and upgrade RoboCop. This isn't your standard tune-up, it's a full-on enhancement procedure to optimize the cyborg police officer's capabilities and also help him with his memories. Interestingly, he's facing off against Edwina, who claims legal ownership over most of his cybernetic body. He could either comply and begin working for OCP and the new Ed 209Bs, or OCP could take away 92% of RoboCop's metal body parts, which are technically OCP property, and RoboCop himself is an OCP product. Meanwhile, Mason Vogler is having his field day with the cops gone. Vogler and his men reach a supermarket, but they aren't there for groceries, they're wielding an RPG. Mason fires his weapon and asks his men to begin the loot, which is in line with his earlier appeal and ideology. Interestingly enough, it is also revealed that OCP's old man was in fact alive, but on some very serious life support. It seems that he regrets his past actions, but what exactly does he mean? So this issue ends with a revolution in the police department and the beginning of an elegant mess. A new villain in town. To ensure that the newest cops of old Detroit, i.e. the Ed 209Bs, become familiar with the general public, OCP decided to carry out some good old photo ops. Before long, the enforcement droids were present at an elementary school and became a hit with the younger Detroiters. But that's not all. OCP has all its marketing guns. In another video provided by OCP, an Ed 209B was seen saving a man from a fire that besieged an old apartment building. Yes, the droid did save the man, but at the collapse of the entire building. People lost homes. Additionally, OCP was also producing a show called Rage and the Machine, starring a loose cannon cop named Rage and, of course, an Ed 209B. But beyond the small screens of TV and into the real world, the picture was quite different, you see. Food had become a scarce resource, and the Mason Manslaughter's looters were now attacking armored trucks that were bringing food into the city. However, RoboCop and two of the new droids came to the scene and opened fire without any prior warning. Of course, RoboCop was not happy about it and stood between one of the droids and a woman who wanted to surrender. The droid would have killed her had it not been for RoboCop. A lot of blood had been spilled, but no one batted an eye because OCP's agenda was killing the criminals instead of getting rid of the crime. It was believed that Mason Manslaughter was one of the criminals killed. While OCP pathologists sorted through the bloody, bullet-strewn, dismembered remains of the looters, Edwina appeared before the media for a press conference. She was clear. Looting was to be met with zero tolerance by the new OCP-run Detroit Police Department, or DPD. She further went on to say that she was curating the new start for old Detroit and hoped that it would be a spark for a new America. Well, the woman was actually laying the groundwork for her candidacy for president. Sergeant Reed, Ann Lewis, and a few other cops were hanging out in a bar looking at the unfolding events when RoboCop came in. Apart from Reed, no one understood RoboCop's plight, not even Ann Lewis. RoboCop left the place in disappointment only to bump into a reporter called Jerome H. Moss. Now, Jerome ran a newspaper called the Old Detroit Beacon, the only newspaper in town not owned by a company you could trace back to OCP, and the only newspaper that would objectively criticize OCP. RoboCop was not really interested, you see. He was not much of a talker, and if you were not reporting a crime to him, you were wasting his time. Nevertheless, Jerome did manage to seed RoboCop's mind with an important question: why did OCP stop the RoboCop project right after him? Well, they produced innumerable enforcement droids. Why stop at just one RoboCop? What was it that OCP wanted from him and just him? Why was he allowed to remain on the force while everyone else had been sacked? Back at the Media Break studio, reporters Casey Wong and Jess Perkins were talking about the recent internet ban in Detroit, but they were intervened by a gun-wielding man who first shot Perkins and then Wong. Any guesses? Well, this was Mason Manslaughter Vogler, who thought the best way to avenge his loyal comrades and stop OCP propaganda from spreading was by shooting the reporters on live TV. Of course, OCP sent the droids and RoboCop to the scene, but the droid could not enter the building because of the stairs, so the task fell upon the cyborg cop. He got into a chopper and planned to jump on the terrace of the building, but the bad guys had a surface-to-air heat-seeking missile. The Stinger hit the chopper, hurling RoboCop down. That's where the comic ends, but then again, he would be more or less fine because Alex Murphy wears not just metal armor, but also extremely strong plot armor, right? Edwina and Mason are not what they appear. A RoboCop story is nothing if not filled with dark humor. Two of Mason Manslaughter's men were on a patrol. One of them was not happy about climbing so many stairs, but the other was more than okay with it. Apparently, he was once obese and had been training and doing triathlons for 2 years now. The transformation was making him feel much better now, as if his life had turned around. Alas, RoboCop crashed into the building after falling down from the chopper and crash landed on this poor fitness freak. Needless to say, he did not survive, and his life that had turned around had stopped existing in one clean sweep. The other dude was pretty happy for having a close save, but quite expectedly, he perished when the chopper itself took him out after crashing into the building. Of course, Mason Manslaughter knew that the metal cops had entered the building. He warned his followers that if they did not fight, they would be silenced, their truth would be buried. He firmly believed that this was a holy war, a war between metal and flesh, a war between evil and good, but RoboCop, who had just come to apprehend manslaughter, was both flesh and metal. So what did it make RoboCop in Manslaughter's eyes? Was RoboCop good, evil, or a mix of both? Nevertheless, as always, RoboCop warned his adversaries to drop their weapons and surrender to get arrested. And as always, no one batted an eye. I don't understand how it was that criminals of Detroit did not learn that fighting RoboCop is nothing but futile. Anyway, they opened fire and RoboCop used one of the bad guys as a human shield before taking out everyone but Mason. The dude who was used as a human shield was literally obliterated. Gruesome stuff and definitely not for the weak. Mason once again fired his RPG and managed to hit the cyborg cop. Next thing we know, he was firing at RoboCop with a machine gun. But of course, RoboCop was not one to go down easy. He was still in the fight. This fight had taken so much punishment. Was he just a mechanical pawn of his failed and decayed society? Nevertheless, Mason was taken care of by RoboCop, after which he was hailed as a hero by the OCP, guys, and the media. In fact, RoboCop was being celebrated as the human face of the DPD, which was now a force filled with robots. Anyway, Edwina Odenkirk came to the spot and ordered RoboCop to report to the precinct for his memory download. RoboCop asked why, but got no answers. Meanwhile, Jerome H. Moss, the reporter, arrived and started asking some really tough questions to Edwina. You see, Detroit's internet had been disbanded to ensure that Detroit was cut off from the rest of America, so did it mean it was a coup policed by the cops? Of course, Odenkirk ordered Moss to be taken away, but he was not someone who could be silenced so easily. RoboCop asked the OCP guards to back off, telling them that he would take care of Moss. However, RoboCop had other things on his mind. He gave Moss directions to an OCP employee vehicle and asked him to follow Mason's vehicle. Moss saw an opportunity here and obliged, but it was an extremely risky mission. Interestingly, but expectedly enough, something really was cooking between Edwina and Mason. She let him out of his vehicle. It initially looked like she was going to order her droids to shoot him, making it look like a fake encounter. However, Edwina had larger plans with Mason. She let him escape and also provided him with the location of a huge stash of weapons that had previously been confiscated by the Detroit Police Department. Moss was there at the scene, clicking pictures and collecting evidence. But why did Edwina let Mason escape? Well, she wanted the world to see that OCP saved Detroit. But first, she needed someone to save it from. RoboCop came in for his regular memory download, but something was up with this. Also, the old man was becoming healthier by the day, and Mason and his men were wreaking havoc in all of Detroit. Reinforcement. The fourth issue does not have a lot of RoboCop action, but yes, it is still all blood and iron, all Old Testament. However, let's for a moment focus on the new dynamic between Old Man and RoboCop. The cyborg cop suddenly found himself meeting Dick Jones, the former vice president of OCP. However, he was killed in the first movie, right? So how was it that Dick was still alive? Well, he wasn't. RoboCop and Old Man's minds had been somehow connected by the OCP scientists. You could say RoboCop was inside the Old Man's mind. The Old Man had a proposition for Murphy, a barter that could help both of them. Murphy was confused. He was just a machine, so what could the Old Man possibly want that he did not already have? Well, age had finally taken over the Old Man's body. He would have been dead months ago were it not for the wonders of technology, and now he wanted to use technology to cheat death itself. He wished to transfer his mind into Murphy's cyborg body, the same robotic body that Murphy despised. But the Old Man welcomed that robotic body. His technicians had been testing the process while under undertaking RoboCop's recent memory procedures, and now the scientists were sure that the process would work. Of course, RoboCop asked why could he possibly agree to such a thing. The old man said that it would give Murphy a body of flesh and blood. Although old and dying and decaying, Murphy would once again be able to touch his family and he could become a human again. But why was the old man asking for RoboCop's permission? I mean, he could have just taken whatever he wanted, so why ask? Well, apparently he wanted the process to be amicable. While Murphy thought about the whole thing, Detroit was plunging into a state of chaos. Since Mason and his men had turned Detroit into a war zone, OCP released their 50-foot giant enforcement droids to deal with the looters and rioters. And yet OCP was still peddling propaganda new pieces. Edwina went on air to say antisocial behavior and crime in the old Detroit has grown to the point where it simply needs a larger deterrent, a bigger gun, if you will. So we at OCP are delighted to unveil the ultimate modern crime deterrent, the ED 309. However, the ED 309s did not discriminate between the bad guys and the super bad guys, or the good guys for that matter. So one of them took down a used chopper. Edwina was not surprised by this and asked her junior to send more choppers in to cover the story. The president called Edwina, but the lady was so much in control that she refused to take his call. On the other hand, reporter Moss's office had been shut down. The internet was down and the only news channel still operation was owned by OCP, and this guy had photographic evidence of OCP's collaborating with a known terrorist. So he thought to himself that he should take his mama's advice: if you witness a crime, tell a cop. Moss reached the bar where the cops hung out, shifting the focus to the streets. Mason was still fighting his battle against the unholy metal monsters. He believed that with his weapons he was sending a heroic, defiant message akin to Dr. King's dream, a message that would inexorably etched into righteous foundations of the glorious country that was America. Well, he could not be more wrong. By now, most of the looters had fled or stopped fighting, but Edwina did not want the massacre by the ED 309s to stop. She really wanted to send a message, much like Mason manslaughter. But amidst all this darkness, there was a silver lining. Moss had managed to rally the cops and convince them to fight for their city, to stop the crime that was plaguing Detroit. Ann Lewis had come to save RoboCop, but she got shot down by one of the OCP guards. In her dying breath, she asked Murphy to remember that he was still a human, and that's all he was deep inside. But unfortunately, Murphy had agreed to the mind transfer process in Old Man's mind, and the signal was relayed into the real world to the scientists. But hold on, that's not the end. In the climax of RoboCop issue 4, part of the Revolution story arc, a critical turn of events unfolds. Meanwhile, the situation escalates on the streets as the ED 309s begin a chaotic attack on Reed and his team. Unexpectedly, the robots seize fire. The reason for this sudden stop is revealed in the digital world. Alex has connected himself directly to OCP, the corporation behind the ED 309s, allowing him to shut down every unit remotely. Murphy rejects the offer to transfer his mind, asserting his freedom. The issue concludes with RoboCop resolutely standing, carrying the body of Lewis, which is the end of the Revolution arc. Ballistic Trauma. In RoboCop issue 5 titled Ballistic Trauma, the story continues directly from the events of the previous issue. RoboCop finds himself embroiled in a fierce shootout. His immediate goal is to secure medical aid for Anne, who had sustained a gunshot wound that has shifted from her right to her left side. Well, someone was not paying attention. Murphy takes her to a dilapidated hospital. Of course, the issue at hand is serious and urgent, otherwise Lewis would lose her life. Upon arrival, Murphy encounters and neutralizes a group of criminals occupying the hospital. His search for medical assistance leads him to a central area where he expects to find a doctor. However, Murphy is unexpectedly confronted by Dick Jones, a figure he recognizes as a manifestation of his recent integration with OCP's mainframe. This encounter is soon replaced by another hallucination, this time featuring Clarence. In his quest, Murphy encounters a severely injured criminal. Using his terminal strip, he coerces the criminal to reveal information about the medical staff. The criminal discloses that while most doctors have abandoned the hospital, one female doctor remained behind only to be kidnapped. Determined, Murphy impales the criminal's shoulder, deciding to take him along as a guide to locate the abducted doctor, thus continuing his mission under dire and complex circumstances. Alex Murphy learns some information about a warehouse located at the docks where the doctor could be present. During the journey, Murphy's mind, still reeling from his connection to OCP's mainframe, conjures vivid hallucinations, including a distorted vision of Emile, a character previously toxified. This distraction causes Murphy to inadvertently collide with an Ed-209. The Ed-209, triggered by the collision, relentlessly pursues them. In a tactical cop strategy, Lois, accompanying Murphy, directs him to a narrow alley, momentarily eluding their mechanical pursuer. However, the respite is brief as the Ed-209 launches a missile, striking their police car and resulting in the death of the accompanying criminal. RoboCop, with timely reflexes and his uber-cool persona, manages to rescue Anne from the wreckage. They find her path blocked by a group of Ed-209s at the alley's exit. Undeterred, Murphy creates a new escape route by punching through a wall, leading them towards the docks. On this path, Murphy's troubled sight continues to project hallucinations, this time envisioning two homeless individuals as his late creator, Bob Morton, from the original movie, and the notorious and ruthless villain, Bodeker, a guy who killed Murphy in the first place. Reaching the warehouse, Murphy uses his thermograph to ascertain that 17 armed individuals were inside. He gently sets Lewis down, promising to return, and shares a brief, tender moment with her. In a surreal twist, Murphy envisions Morton once more, urging him to confront the felons. He proceeds to neutralize the armed individuals inside the warehouse. Upon locating the door, Murphy urgently requests her assistance. The issue concludes with a heart-wrenching revelation from the doctor. Anne had succumbed to her gunshot wounds hours earlier, unbeknownst to Murphy. Profit Warrior. In RoboCop Issue 6, titled Profit Warrior, the story opens with a lone Ed-309 wreaking more havoc. The droid fatally shoots a young man in Old Detroit. The focus then shifts to Edwina engrossed in her exercise routine. Despite being informed of an impending press conference, she dismisses the need for preparation, asserting her focus on demonstrating authority. The situation escalates when Edwina learns from an assistant that an Ed-309 unit is missing. Speculated to have malfunctioned due to damage incurred in a previous battle with Vogler, the missing Ed-309 poses a significant financial loss for OCP, estimated at around $100 million, and a public safety hazard. Edwina promptly orders its retrieval. The rogue Ed-309 continues its rampage, annihilating a fisherman named Mitchell in its misguided mission. The robot, mistaking its surroundings for a war zone, sets its sights on Canada, the nearest country. OCP recruits Reed and other officers to intercept the Ed-309 before it can reach the Canadian border. Despite their efforts, including a strategy to target its knees, the Ed-309 proved resilient, firing missiles and causing significant damage to their vehicle. In the nick of time, RoboCop intervenes, shielding the officers from the Ed-309, which curiously does not engage him. Meanwhile, OCP personnel realize the robot's trajectory towards Canada and discuss deploying additional Ed-309 units in pursuit. Edwina, however, is hesitant, weighing the potential profits against the risks. As the crisis unfolds, RoboCop, Reed, and another officer race to the scene. They pass through a chaotic Air National Guard base, continuing their pursuit. At the border, a dramatic confrontation takes place as the rogue Ed-309 begins crossing into Canada over the Port Huron Bridge. The climax reveals Edwina's masterstroke. She had sold functional Ed-309 units to the Canadian government, which are now deployed at the border. As RoboCop, Warren, and the officer observe, the rogue Ed-309 is neutralized by these Canadian units. In the aftermath, Edwina celebrates the incident's financial success for OCP, with the series concluding on a note of corporate triumph and moral ambiguity. That's where the story ends, with a not very satisfactory ending, but yeah. Marvel's Verdict. This comic series, penned by Rob Williams, delivers a robust mix of action and social commentary true to the RoboCop legacy. Fans can expect a dynamic blend of human, robot, and cross-species conflicts, staying faithful to the franchise's roots. Williams' narrative is competent and engaging, surpassing the entertainment value of the film sequels. However, there's a sense of caution in his approach, possibly to the detriment of deeper exploration. The series' social commentary is a mixed bag, effectively capturing the essence in some instances, while in others it seems overly focused on contemporary political themes rather than mirroring the unique socio-political atmosphere of the original 1987 setting. The work of artist Fabiano Neves is another talking point. While his work shows brilliance in places, there's a noticeable inconsistency in the detailing. This fluctuation leads to a peculiar visual experience, with some characters and scenes echoing the vintage 80s aesthetic, while others appear distinctly modern. In conclusion, while the series has its inconsistencies and areas needing refinement, it's a promising direction for the RoboCop saga. It offers much for fans to appreciate, especially given the current depth of fresh material in the franchise. Stay tuned for more updates, explorations, and reviews on RoboCop. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more comic book insights and analysis.